for me, it's making sure that my family is always well provided for, that my personal relationships are intact and thriving.
All right, all my dental business owners, you're going to love this episode. We're speaking to Dr. Mark Costes. And if you don't know the name right when I mention it, he is the host of the Dentalpreneurs podcast, Ring a Bell. He's also the founder of the Dental Success Institute and the Dental Success Network, and wrote the book Pillars of Dental Success. Now, if you are not a dental business owner, then you still will find this interview extremely enlightening, because it's fascinating to hear his perspective on business ownership. What set business owners aside who have made a brilliant overcoming of all our obstacles in COVID, what his greatest challenges are as a business owner right now in the summer of 2021, and how happiness and mindset affect our success in business. I know you're going to love this interview. And fascinatingly enough, this man, you won't believe it, but you'll hear it in the interview. He applied to dental school 21 times before he was accepted. Listen to this episode and hear some other fascinating insight from Dr. Mark Costes. Hello and welcome to the Business of Happiness podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Tarryn MacCarthy, and today we have with us a spectacular guest, Dr. Mark Costes. Mark, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, Tarryn, thank you so much. You got to be on my podcast. Now I get to be on yours. This is fun.
This is awesome. This is so wonderful. And especially during this time that we're able to do this with the technology at hand. We had some little hiccups there this morning, and look, we still made it work. It's really cool.
Yeah, this is a really cool platform that you have here. I'm very envious of what you've set up.
Oh, great.
Well, a little copying, I think.
The feeling is mutual. The admiration is mutual. And, you know, one of the biggest reasons why I wanted to have you on the show, Mark, is because your story and your journey through your career is a fascinating one. And I'd love you to share a little bit about your professional journey and how you've gone definitely in the dental world to now a dental coach, writing this incredible Amazon best-selling book called The Pillars of Dental Success, and then hosting the very, very famous in the dental world Dentalpreneurs podcast that so many people head to for a great resource for information. So give us a little bit about your journey of where you came and kind of how you got to where you are now.
Sure. I'll do my best to keep it brief, but yeah, I was I'm a first generation American. My parents both immigrated from the Philippines. I was the first Costes to be born here on American soil in New York. And we traveled around a lot because my dad was an electrical engineer for IBM. So we popped from Chicago to New York to Colorado to Arizona to Southern California. And then I ended up going to dental school in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. But, you know, dentistry really wasn't on my radar. I had a couple aunts that were dentists, but they were in the Philippines. So I never had that firsthand experience of here's somebody that I want to kind of model my life after. But when I was 16 years old, I was playing in a baseball game. I was an outfielder, and I had a collision with the left field fence, and I knocked out all of my anterior teeth on top. I broke my jaw, and that sent me on a really interesting trajectory. Over the next 18 months, I had a really, really great crew of dentists and dental specialists kind of putting my face back together. I grew a huge admiration for what they were doing. It was very, very interesting to me how they were able to take, you know, bits and pieces of my face and put it back together. And my smile actually looks better than it did before the accident. And so that set me on this trajectory of wanting to be, you know, a dentist. I was kind of an undiagnosed ADD kid. I bounced around a lot, and I had a very difficult time with reading and comprehension. So I played a little bit of college athletics, and then decided that I was going to shift over and focus on trying to get into dental school. Took me 3 years and 21 tries to get into dental school. Didn't have a great GPA after
21 tries.
Yeah. 21 tries and 20 rejections.
Mark, if that isn't perseverance, I don't know what is. Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah. So 3 years and 21 tries. I I was in San Diego. I went to UC San Diego, graduated with a psychology degree. And for that 3 years, I just kind of focused on applying and reapplying and reapplying and reapplying. During that time, though, it was actually quite a blessing. Looking back, it was probably the best thing that could have ever happened for me, because I wasn't probably mature enough to start a professional program. I got accepted into the executive MBA program at the University of San Diego. So I learned a lot more about business. I bought my first business during that period of time, and I met my wife during that period of time. So it all worked out perfectly. After that, became a multiple practice owner. As soon as I graduated, did an associateship for a year. Then the first year I had 3 practices, and we went all the way up to 16 practices at one point. I now have 6 dental practices. I'm blessed enough to be able to be a speaker and an author and a coach to the dental profession. So dentistry has been a huge, huge blessing in my life. And I just consider myself lucky to have squeaked in.
Wow, that's a great story. I think so many people can relate to different aspects of that, but most certainly to just pursuing your dreams and knowing what you want and then continuing to go after it. My question is, what was it about that perseverance? Like, what did you have in you that got you through the 16th and the 17th rejection? I mean, honestly, once you get to that point, how did you just keep pursuing, knowing that this is something you wanted to do?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of stubbornness. We can mix stubbornness in with perseverance and grit, I guess. I think that kind of immigrant mindset, that immigrant edge, had a lot to do with it. Watching my parents, and hearing their story. They started with like $150 in a suitcase, and they built a great, beautiful life in the United States. And, with that as the backdrop, and that as my example, my number one example growing up, I just fixed my mind on one goal, and I wasn't going to take no for an answer. And I don't want to take a lot of credit for that. It was just, I didn't have anything else going on. This is what I selected that I wanted to do. And I just figured that if I kept on trying, it eventually would work out, and it did.
What's interesting is that it was also a slightly non-traditional dental route, because not every dentist owns 16 practices, and not every dentist starts a podcast. Yeah, so sure. You continued to kind of tailor that for yourself over time. So where did that new kind of thinking outside the box, new entrepreneurial side of you come from? And how did you give yourself permission to pursue that, knowing that you had just your eyes focused on dentistry for so long?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the entrepreneurial side of me preceded the dental interest, right? So I feel like my dad kind of not gave up, but he sacrificed his dream of becoming an entrepreneur so that he could provide a great living for us, a great secure living. But the DNA of entrepreneurialism in my family goes way, way back, generations. And, that was the main topic at the dinner table when I was growing up. It was always, your great uncle owned a shipping line, and your grandma was a loan shark, and she used to lend money to people in the village, and my mom would have to go collect the interest. And your aunt owned a prawn farm and a nightclub. And those, like, entrepreneurial runs deep in my family. And I think that was something that I always wanted to do. I think a portion of my interest in dentistry was that it was going to be able to provide my family with the security, but it also had the flexibility within it that I could flex my entrepreneurial muscles and seek different business ventures within the profession. And that's exactly what I was able to do, we started off with a dental assisting school in one of my practices. And then people started asking me, hey, it looks like the dental assisting school is really busy. Can I borrow your materials, or can I buy your materials and start my own dental assisting school? And that turned into the largest dental assisting school company in the country. And we have 240 locations of that now. In fact, we don't sell it anymore because we've sold out all of our locations. And, that was my first dip into, like, in addition to the multiple practice thing, I had that venture going on, and then people started asking me to speak about, multiple practice ownership. That's how, the podcast was born. And it's just one great kind of opportunity after the next. But I think that you have to be looking for opportunity, right? It's not like these doors just opened wide open and I just kind of marched right in. It was like, okay, I think I see a void in the marketplace, and I'm going to see if I can create something that would fill that void. And just like they always say, you get paid for adding value to the marketplace.
That's so cool. I think that this is something so unique, to be honest with you, within the dental business world, because what I see a lot of and what I hear a lot of from clients and from listeners is people become very single-minded and focused on one way, and then end up becoming very disillusioned when outside forces impact their very narrow-minded sense of success.
Right.
I think one great example is this past year with COVID impacting the dental world so enormously. And so what do you think it is between businesses who were able to sustain the kind of ripple effects of COVID and the ones that really were able to thrive and if not grow after and during these past 2 years?
Yeah, going back to your original point, I do think that dentistry attracts a certain type of personality, and that personality is, analytical, people that are extremely intelligent, but a lot of times there's a single focus, and that's the clinical focus. And if anything happens within the business, if there's not enough money in the bank at the end of the month, or they're having to put their payroll on credit cards, their initial reaction is, I have to figure out how I could produce more dentistry, because if you're a hammer, the whole world's a nail. And that's the one skill set that they can count on. I have to produce more dentistry, and that'll get me out of this problem. I think that is logical, but misguided in a lot of ways. There's a reason. There's kind of if we were to go back upstream and figure out, if we're looking at this as from a holistic perspective rather than an allopathic perspective, to treat that symptom of not having enough money, then we are going to go and try to produce more dentistry, right? That's an allopathic model. You have a headache, you take an aspirin, you're not thinking about, like, maybe I'm grinding my teeth, and that's the original reason why, I have a headache or whatever. That's just one example. But if we're going to go further upstream, then we're going to look at the root cause, more of a holistic reason of why there isn't enough money in the bank account at the end of the month. Why is the practice chaotic all day, every day? Why am I so miserable in my career? And I can't figure that out. So we're going to go back upstream and try to figure out what the root cause of that is. I think the people that have thrived throughout, this very challenging year and a half are the people that have more of a holistic view of their practice. The fact that, they are more stable business-wise, typically meant that they had a little bit more money set aside for an emergency. A lot of the people that were living hand to mouth prior to the pandemic found themselves in a bit more of a pinch, I think, and those are the ones that continue to struggle. But the people that have kind of put themselves and built a nice infrastructure for their dental practices are the ones that are thriving now. They're completely taking advantage of the benefits of being able to survive through the last year and a half.
Absolutely. And it's interesting to also see the parallels in other aspects of their lives. How you do one thing is how you do everything, which is a really interesting phenomenon. When you talk about the pillars of dental success, which is your book that you published, what are those pillars, and do they relate to what we're talking about?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's funny. I've had the benefit. We have over 1,200 podcast episodes recorded now over the last 5.5 years. And I've spoken all over the world. I just got back from Croatia. I got to speak it was pretty cool. I got to speak on a boat in the Adriatic Sea in Croatia. So I've gotten a chance to speak to dentists from all over the world. I've spoken in most of the 50 states at more than half of the dental schools. And, when you boil it all down, there's probably a handful of things that everybody struggles with as far as practice ownership, right? Even though everybody feels as though their problem is unique to only them, I think that because of my unique perspective and because I get to talk to so many people, I've kind of boiled down those to 5 or 6 different areas that most people struggle with, right? It's new patient acquisition. It's human resources. It's cash flow and overhead control. It's patient experience. There's a number of different things that everybody universally has to deal with and master in order to have, what we call a sophisticated business. And once you kind of identify what those main areas are, and you come up with processes to master those areas, you're going to find yourself with a really, really nice, secure living, but also a practice that doesn't rely on you solely, and you can eliminate yourself as a bottleneck from your business.
Well, that's really interesting. So for you, the ideal for success is being able to eliminate that dentist at the top of the hierarchy?
100%. 100%. I mean, if you've read the E-Myth Revisited with Michael Gerber, he does a really nice job, I think, of kind of breaking it down. Like, if you are the primary technician, and you're also expected to be the manager of this thing and the entrepreneur, those are three totally different hats that you have to wear. But you don't really have a true business if you are the only one that's producing the dentistry, and you are the only one that's managing the practice, and you are the only one that's solely in charge of bringing in new patients, and you are the only one that's, responsible for collecting all that money. Of course, we want to have a knowledge in all of those areas, but you have to create a team and processes that can actually run without your presence. Even when it comes, I will even say, even when it comes to producing the dentistry, you have to have people other than yourself that can produce that dentistry, so that the business isn't solely reliant upon you.
And that's fascinating, because that really is a mindset shift for so many practitioners who wear all the hats, especially when they're starting out in their business and your business is really small, and you have to start wearing every single hat in your practice until you start reaching a certain level of financial freedom.
Oh, it's so true. And, it's nobody's fault, because it just wasn't set up that way. We barely have enough time in 4 years to learn the dentistry, just enough to not hurt people when we get out. There certainly isn't time to become, very, very knowledgeable about the business of dentistry. I think that dental schools get a lot of heat for not providing that type of knowledge and real world kind of practical strategy when we're in dental school. But frankly, I just don't think there's the time. I think that you really have to seek it after you graduate. Interestingly enough, when we graduate, many of the kids nowadays are, between $250,000 and $450,000 in debt just from student loan debt. And they have no idea how to run a business, yet the banks will readily lend them another $1 million to go buy one or start one. So the responsibility does lay solely on the shoulders of the practitioner and the person that's actually going to be borrowing the money to go out and get that information, get that knowledge, and figure out how to do this without making huge mistakes like I did when I was starting out.
Well, it's also interesting because it speaks to a lot of the anxiety and overwhelm that we hear from solo practitioners and business owners in dentistry, just because they are wearing so many hats and taking on so many responsibilities within the practice, and not seeking out additional expertise within the business to help them run the business.
Indeed. I agree 100%. That was one of the things that I did wrong. I think I've made just about every mistake you can make in business ownership and leadership and everything you can make a mistake on. Over the years, I've made that mistake. But my biggest thing was that I tried to do it myself without any help. Right. And looking back, it took me probably 5 years before I seeked out a coach. I ended up getting a business coach that wasn't in the dental realm, because the ones that were available to me, I didn't agree with their philosophies. So I found somebody outside of dentistry, and that was kind of a turning point for me, when I had somebody that was like, okay, here are the basics of, here's how you read, your financial reports. Here's what this means. Here's some strategy when it comes to hiring people. And, your leadership style isn't all that right now, because it's you have a very dictatorial approach, and you're just a little bit harsh when you're dealing with people, and you have to soften your edges a little bit. It wasn't until I had somebody that was objectively looking from the outside saying, here are some things that you can tweak, when things started to take off for me. And it took me a little bit of time to come to that conclusion, and to say, I'm going to have to invest a little bit of money to get this knowledge, and to have this person on my side that's going to help guide me into these areas that you can't figure out yourself unless you're willing to to spend an entire career trying to figure it out yourself, and a lot of money trying to figure it out yourself.
If you're listening to this podcast, chances are you didn't get into business to be miserable. The problem is that people feel that if their business gets busier, if they start becoming more successful, that happiness will eventually set in. But it can actually get worse. This is why I created the Business of Happiness Prosperity Coaching. In this one-on-one coaching, we look at how to redefine success on your terms and re-find the joy and the passion in your dream. Visit me at thebizofhappiness.com and become the happiest business owner you know.
Yeah, so how important is it to have a coach or a mentor?
I think it's everything.
Yeah.
I think it's everything. I think nowadays, new business owners have a benefit that you and I didn't have when we graduated from dental school, and there's a lot of free resources out there.
Yeah.
So I didn't have any free resources. Now there's, what are there? Over 100 dental podcasts. I was the 5th one. Now there's over 100. There are lots of great resources for young dentists out there where they can learn the basics of practice management, and even clinical stuff is, so much more accessible. All of the training is so much more accessible than it was when we graduated from dental school. But beyond that, I think that it's really important to have somebody that has actually traversed the waters that you want to traverse yourself, that's already made the mistakes. And, you can get a business coach that, even if they've had just, one practice and they've done it wrong and then they've done it right, you can learn from that type of person so much about what not to do. And that could save you hundreds of thousands of dollars and millions of dollars over a career.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in dentistry, solo practitioners tend to become very insular anyway. It's very hard to find a community to have those open and honest conversations. We tend to hold on to and keep our secrets close to ourselves. And so having a coach or a mentor is also an opportunity to be a little bit more vulnerable and share some of those struggles that you're having.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's interesting. The profession kind of did that to us, right? It was like when we were an undergrad trying to get into dental school, it's like you kind of held your cards close to vest, because, most of the science classes, there was only a certain number of A's that were going to come out. So it wasn't like we were bred to share information with one another. In dental school, it got even worse, especially for people like you that decided that you wanted to specialize. It's like, well, I'm not going to, if I have, an insight into what they're going to ask on the test, I'm not going to necessarily share that with the rest of my class, right?
Yeah.
Because there's 1 or 2 or 3 spots for ortho, or just maybe one. And all of it is very, very competitive. And then you get out into the real world, and your colleagues that you have left now, because your dental school classmates kind of go into the wind and everybody does their own thing. Now your new colleagues are the people within your study club in your local area. And I'll tell you right now, with having 16 practices in 16 different communities and been a part of all of those different study clubs, people aren't readily sharing their best strategies for patient acquisition or anything else, because they view you as a competitor. Whether or not they're friendly to you, to your face, doesn't mean that they're going to share all their best stuff. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So we kind of learn early on in our career that if it's going to be successful, it's up to me alone, and I can't count on anybody else. So that does kind of create this feeling of I'm an island and I have to figure this all out on my own, and we suffer in that.
Yes.
That's always been my kind of mission in dentistry, is to eliminate that mindset, which is why we have DSN, which is 1,000 like-minded dentists that are all there sharing their best stuff. There's no competitive nature. Nobody is withholding anything. Nobody's snarky. Everybody's positive, supporting one another. And that's what I try to preach when I'm speaking to audiences, and even in my podcast. That's my mission in dentistry, is to make sure that we're sharing our best stuff, because there's plenty. There should be a feeling of abundance rather than scarcity, as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely. And I think that just having that mindset of abundance as opposed to scarcity really allows you to step up to the next level in business. I think that's one of the things that holds people back, is feeling that sense of lack or scarcity, and it prevents them from being able to see outside the box and think differently and pivot when they need to, when they're always holding on to that sense of lack.
Oh, it's so true, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I have I'm so blessed to have my best friends are, within a community where, we have a thread where it's like, hey, do you have a consent form for this? Or what would you do if this patient said this? Or I just got a board complaint. What should I do? And just to have, 10 people come onto the thread and say, hey man, it's okay. It's happened to me before. Here's how I navigated that. It's invaluable. It's very difficult to even explain how valuable that is to people that have never had that type of support before.
So in your professional career now and doing the podcast and the Dental Success Institute and coaching, what are some of the struggles that you're finding now in this expanded business venture that you're in, put with your fingers in so many different exciting places, the 16 practices. So what are some of your challenges now?
Well, it's a timeless challenge since day one of being a practice owner. It's been human resources, right? It's been the biggest challenge has always been, where do I find the right team members that could help me run this operation so that we can continue to scale, right? I go back to what I was speaking about earlier, and that is you can't do it all yourself. And if you are the primary person trying to do everything, it's always going to hinder your growth. If that's what you want to do is grow. And in my view, for me, continual expansion and continual growth with a high level of quality control is the only way that I can scratch that entrepreneurial itch for myself. So I think that we can all agree that since the pandemic, many people that own businesses have realized that it's more difficult to find qualified people that are willing to work than it ever has been. I mean, I've been doing this for 20 years. I've owned dental practices for 18, and I've never experienced such a vacuum of talent and willing workers in the workforce. It's crazy. And without getting political, it's difficult to motivate somebody to come in for $16 an hour when, for the last, 18 months, they've been getting $20 an hour to stay at home.
Yeah.
So it's very, very difficult. We've never faced these types of challenges. I think the only way that we can overcome this as a profession is to figure out a way to take people that are a good culture fit, that are ambitious, that are willing to work, and have a good streamlined approach to training them within your dental office. Many of us feel as though we're being held hostage by somebody that just graduated, say from dental assisting school, and they want $30 an hour. And when the going rate in your area is 14, as a business owner, you know that can't continue and it won't work. It feasibly won't work. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't pay people what they're worth, but there are realities of business ownership. Right. And you can't spend 75% of your gross revenue on payroll alone when you have a lot of other things that you have to worry about paying for just to keep the lights on. So I honestly believe that's why we created Front Office Academy, which is our newest business. I honestly believe that if we can empower the dentists to have some sort of a platform to take people that are great culture fits, great personalities, hard workers that don't necessarily have any knowledge of dentistry, and we can plug them into some sort of training protocol without taking the time away from operations from you or your office manager or your team leads. That is the future of dentistry, and we have to be able to do that because we can't continue to go down the road that we've all found ourselves going down, and that's overpaying for subpar applicants.
Absolutely. I think everyone listening to the show can agree that that's a struggle we're all having at the moment. So I think you've hit the nail on the head there. What is your superpower, Dr. Costes?
I think that the thing that separates me from everybody else is that I recognize what my weaknesses are and I hire for my weaknesses, right? So it was 9 years ago now. Yes, 9 years ago now when I hired my first personal assistant. And her name is Ashley. And she ended up going all the way up the ranks, and now she's a COO of one of my companies. I hired her for $10 an hour, 10 hours a week, 9 years ago. She was extremely overqualified for the position, but she was new to town and she just wanted to do something. So she started making my plane reservations, and she started, doing tiny things for me that that I just didn't have the bandwidth to do.
Mm.
But then I realized, oh my gosh, there's somebody that's really good with Excel spreadsheets. There's somebody that's really, really good with this technology that I don't understand. There's somebody that's really fast at typing. And all of those things that I wasn't good at, I handed over to her, and she is excellent at them. And that's where she excels. That's just one example. You know, I also have struggles in other areas of business ownership, or just don't have the bandwidth to do certain things. So I have the ability, my superpower is I have the ability to recognize what I don't like to do and what I'm not necessarily good at, and I hire for that. I'm in the position where I have 100 employees now, and my executive team that I've been able to select and recruit is a lot smarter and a lot better than me in a lot of different areas. And they take a lot of the weight and pressure off me as a business owner because I trust them. So being able to find people that fill in all the gaps for the things that I'm not good at, I think that's my superpower. Surrounding myself with smarter people.
It's a great leadership skill too. It's sometimes the antithetical to what people think leadership is, but it's the most powerful part of being a good, successful leader. And what's interesting is you mentioned skills that you're not good at, but you also said skills that you don't enjoy, which is really interesting when it comes to, as you know, the business of happiness. How much of that impacts your inner fulfillment, you know, because that's a big part of seeing it through for 20 years and pushing through those 21 or 20 no's before getting into dental school is your own inner fulfillment and happiness along the way.
Oh, it's so true. I think that in order to be completely fulfilled, we don't have to eliminate all things that make us uncomfortable from our lives, because I think that there has to be some sort of a balance, and there has to be some sort of a compromise and comparison, right? So I'll use exercise as an example. If I felt as though I didn't want to run my 6 miles that was on my schedule for this morning, and I thought that I would be more fulfilled by staying in bed and in my warm, cushy bed next to my wife for the next hour and a half. That might be a decision that I make, but the fact is that there are certain things that are going to make you uncomfortable that if you actually do them, will make you more fulfilled, right? I think that most general dentists can agree that we don't love, class 2 posterior composites, which is probably why you got into ortho in the first place.
It's exactly why I got into ortho.
but sometimes if we don't have the associate that's willing to do that right away, that we have to do that. And that actual thing that maybe doesn't make us fulfilled in that moment allows us to do, the 5 implant case tomorrow. Because Mrs. Jones needs those class 2s done before we get into the bigger stuff. So I don't know, silly examples, but
no, it's a great example because there's a very fine line there, because especially in someone who has such a intense growth mindset and wants to constantly be stretching that rubber band, you have to be uncomfortable at some point in order to get to the next level. There has to be some stretching, pushing that extra mile so you can run the 7 and then the 8 miles. But there is also a balance between pushing yourself and burnout, or pushing yourself in a direction that's not fulfilling you and just putting your nose to the grindstone, which dentists are so good at, and waking up 20 years later and realizing, wait a minute, I'm completely unfulfilled.
Oh, so I love that you talk about this sort of thing. This is so important, especially for dentistry. I was talking about having the good fortune of speaking to lots of dentists from all over the world, and one of the big common themes is burnout, and really just kind of looking up after a decade and saying, why am I doing this? Why am I seeing 35 patients a day? Why am I doing 215 exams per month? I think that a lot of times we forget that there are other options, and there are other ways that we can adjust our infrastructure so that we're not just driving so hard. And those are sometimes the hardest, most difficult realizations to make, because I will tell you, it's easier to grind if we're comfortable being if we're comfortable being clinicians and working hard, it's easier to do that than to just say, okay, I'm going to take 2 days off with my executive team, and we're going to figure out a way that I don't have to see 35 patients a day. And why am I seeing 35 patients a day to begin with? Is it because they're there and they expect that from me? Well, maybe it might be time to eliminate your lowest reimbursing PPOs or something like that. Or maybe it's time to expand the practice and bring on an associate, but we have to make sure that we do that in the correct order. Those are actually the difficult things to do, is to slow down and say, okay, why am I unhappy? And why am I burnt out? And how can I rectify this? Because a lot of times, you see it all the time in these forums. People are like, I've been doing this for 10 years. I hate what I'm doing. I'm going to give this up, and I'm going to pivot into a different profession. When I know that you went through a very similar situation, and it's like, let's just take some time. Everybody calm down, and let's figure out another way that we can become more fulfilled in our profession. And I'll tell you that when people take the time to do those exercises, it can be very, very powerful. And I will say, to burnout specifically, the one thing that helped me the most, and most of the friends that I have that have experienced extreme burnout when they're ready to leave the profession, if you give more away, if you go on a mission trip and you are reacquainted with this incredible skill set that we've been blessed with, you will have a deeper level of appreciation for the profession that you chose. I go on a mission trip with my son every year to the Dominican Republic, and I'll see 250 patients in a week, and I will leave that experience exhausted, but with my heart so full and so grateful for the skill set that I have, that I can help people. It's such a valuable thing to do. And then we have some free dental days that we do at the practices as well. So if you're first facing burnout, I think the fastest way to snap yourself out of that is to remind yourself of this glorious skill set that you have, and give more of it away for free. It only works 100% of the time.
And what you're talking about is tapping into that abundance mindset again. Just recognizing everything that you do have and within this profession, and all the opportunities and options that we have along the way. So that's wonderful. Dr. Mark, what is your definition of happiness?
Gosh, there's so many things that make me happy. I think that for me, happiness is knowing that I haven't reduced this down to like a one sentence answer, but for me, it's making sure that my family is always well provided for, that my personal relationships are intact and thriving, that I'm coming to the world with an abundance mindset and bringing more value to the world than I'm taking away from the world, and making sure that I'm living my purpose every single day. And that is helping other people to avoid some of the struggles that I've encountered in my journey.
That's great. That's great. Living your truth, really. That's what you're talking about. That's really amazing. So before I ask you our final question today, and thank you, by the way, thank you so much for sharing your insight with us here today. And thank you for everything that you do in the rest of the world in terms of the Dentalpreneurs podcast and all the platforms that you support so many of the men and women in our profession. I applaud you, and I thank you for that.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for this. Thank you for this medium. And thank you. I'm honored.
I love it. I love it. So how can my audience find you if they haven't yet already been listening to you all this time?
Yeah. So the Dentalpreneur podcast is a daily show. They could pop on over there. Make sure you subscribe so that you're updated every time we have a new show. That's a great way to interact with me. The Dental Success Network is great. dentalsuccessnetwork.com. You can always sign up for a 45-day membership completely for free. And then I'm Dr. Mark Costas on Instagram, or Dental Success Institute on Facebook.
Fabulous. And then my final question for you today.
Sure.
What if you knew that all of this incredible work that you have, which this is going to sound devastating, please bear with me, all your writing, all your podcasts, everything were to disappear, all the beautiful talk that you gave in Croatia this week, If everything were to disappear and you could leave us with one final word of advice to all the dental business owners that are out there, what, not necessarily a single word, but a phrase of advice, what would that be?
To the dental profession, I would say, always remember the gift that we have in our training and the value that we can bring to the world with what we've learned. Reminds me of my friend Lewis Howes has a podcast called School of Greatness.
Yes.
He asked he's been on my podcast before. We went to the Philippines and spent some time together. He's a great guy. But he asked a similar question, and I've actually reflected on questions like this after he asks them to famous people, but nobody has ever asked me personally that question. So that's what I would say. I would say, always remember the gift that you have in your training, and don't ever take it for granted, because I was the person that was, for 3 years, I had my face against the glass trying to get into the profession, just wishing that I was one of your colleagues. And for a lot of people, it wasn't that difficult to get into the profession. I'll tell you, as somebody that struggled to get in and worked so hard to get in, there's nothing to take for granted. It is the best profession. And I still believe that after 20 years of doing it.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Well, thank you again. And thank you to all of you for listening to this episode. I'm sure you found so many absolute great insights here. And please share this podcast episode with your friends if you think that they could receive some support from it. I know that there's so many people out there that need to hear these messages from Dr. Mark Costes. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Dr. Tarryn.
Bye-bye.